like anything worth doing, you kind of feel nervous when you start. It's like the first time. It's not really the first time for me. I've got 10 years of broadcasting experience, 7.5, which was spent in commercial radio, 2.5 splits between campus radio and community radio. Like Dave Chappelle, I got off the bus. I quit. I didn't go to Africa because I am in Africa as we speak. So I stayed home but did a bit of traveling and so forth. And it's been exactly 12 months since I was last on radio. And I'm not sure if I'll ever go back. At this point in time, I just want to create what I want to create. So here goes nothing. I decided to dedicate this broadcast. It's not a podcast. It's a broadcast. This is a radio broadcast. Not confined, however, by the rules of radio, because they will call it a podcast, but it is a broadcast. I decided to dedicate it to the kids who passed away at a tavern. This is in the Eastern Cape. And because so 2018 we started a show. I think it must have been 2017. We started a show at Kaya FM called Good Fridays with Skhumba and Dumiso. And Dumiso Ngcobo, one of the great minds of my generation, writer, philosopher, just like myself, a dad, a broadcaster, and Skhumba, who's a storyteller essentially, like myself, and a comedian. One of the greats of my generation, who I was very fortunate to have witnessed live as well as in studio, working alongside him, getting coached and getting to learn the art of storytelling. Although I'm not a comedian, but I'd consider him as a friend, and I've learned a lot from him. But what happens, and this is why I took a long, deep sigh, because we did that show, and it was one of the greatest shows, I think, in radio at that time. And then I moved to Power. But there's a story that I never told, only told to those who were close to me and those who were unfortunate to witness the events that took place during that era between, I'd say, 2016 and 2018. So essentially, and this is why I'm dedicating it to the kids of Eastern Cape. I don't want to say the name of the tavern because it seems like we'll just remember them from the last place that they died at, which was very unfortunate because they were not supposed to be there. But they are kids who are from South Africa, kids who are from Africa, kids who are from a province in the eastern tip of the mother continent. And the reason why I left was because I was an alcoholic. I struggled with alcohol because the industry is tough. And no one trains you, no one prepares you for this, but it's an entertainment industry. And there's a lot of things that happen, which you only find out once you are immersed in the industry and in the art. I remember asking Bob Mabena, why doesn't he attend, some of these events, the awards and all of that. And what he said to me, and we had this conversation only after I had fought the demon of alcohol. He said, I don't need to go everywhere that I'm invited to. And that's how I began, healing and learning and understanding myself. So essentially what happens is I'm drunk half the time. For at least a year and a half, I think I was drunk every day. If you've watched the movie Flight by Denzel Washington, where it's a commission because it's not a court of law. They're still trying to establish what happened before they go to court. So essentially what happens, just a breakdown of that movie, is that Denzel Washington, forgot the name of the character he plays, but the character is a very decent, in fact an excellent pilot, and he's able to pilot this plane when there was massive turbulence and it was supposed to crash and people were supposed to die. But what he did, unfortunately, was he had 2 shots of vodka. And when they were doing the commission, they found that alcohol was suspended on the flight, but there were these 2-shot bottles of vodka that were drunk. And when it was asked who drank them, it was the pilot. So now they're trying to discredit him, and not in a bad way. They're trying to establish, I say this in inverted commas, establish the merits of the case, close quote. So they establish the facts and they find that he drank. But it becomes a very hard thing for him to do, to confess that yes, I drank. But because he was functioning, he was able to save that plane and all of those lives because he was not as drunk, because when you're an alcoholic, you drunk all the time. So even if you didn't drink the whole day today, when you have your first drink, let's say you slept at 2 a.m., you have your first drink at 6 p.m., you were drunk the whole day because your body has not recovered and you're still tired. There's this fatigue that kicks in. It's like people who get involved in drinking and driving accidents. Most of the times, and this is my research, I've found that it's because people are tired. There's fatigue. You have not been resting. So there are some people who can function off alcohol, and then there are others who just get fatigued. And essentially that's what it was. I was functioning in work, but my relationships were breaking down. So Musiburi Whitehead, who was my sports editor at the time, he says, listen, man, I want to help you, but only if you feel like you need to be helped. And at that time, most of the relationships in my life had just broken down, So I was like, yeah, help me, bro. And so he took me to this program called Alcoholic Anonymous. So there's a 12-step program. I'll just be honest from the start. I didn't finish that program because after like 6 months, I felt like I'm good. And my life had gotten back on course. I had reconciled, or at least tried, because that's what the program encourages. Try and reach out to those that you have offended, to those that you have used and abused, to the relationships that you have put on the line. And I did that. So I move on, but it was not as simple. I left a company where people really believed in me, and I disappointed these people. But what was fortunate for me is that I was able to find help in time. And I mean, I grew up in Hillbrow, where it was considered, and I don't know who comes up with these things, but it was considered one of the most dangerous societies in the world. You don't need to tell me or ask me. I know, I lived there. There was a lot of drugs, a lot of alcohol, prostitution. There was basically a pandemic. There was a crack pandemic. There was a prostitution pandemic. There was a crime pandemic. So before the word pandemic became fashionable in 2019, I was living in a pandemic in 1996. So there are these predispositions that I have because of the environment that I come from and that I grew up in for 14 years. It never manifested, not even once. Even in high school, none of that happened. I was in the executive. I was deputy head boy. I was soccer captain at some point. So none of the dysfunction ever came up because it was not time. It was just laying dormant. And so that's why I'm saying I'm dedicating this to the kids who fell to abuse of alcohol, negligence. We don't know the merits of the case thus far. But what we do know is that these kids should not have died. They were underage. They were not supposed to be where they are. So what happens when you find yourself in a place where you're not supposed to be at? You need to, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I've made it out of the gutter, and I feel like there was an angel. Musiburi was one of those people. Even Skhumbuzo Hlophe Skhumba, Ndumiso Ngcobo. These are the people that I was working with who saw that, yo, my man, you've got a problem. Unfortunately, not now. You can't work in the space until you've sorted yourself out. So I understood that. Now, the flip side of this story, and that's why I'm saying I think God just handed me a lifeline, but not everyone is going to get it. So how do we create that lifeline? My lifeline was that I was only unemployed for 1 hour. Essentially, my contract was terminated. I was told, ahead of time, 2 months ahead, that we'll be terminating your contracts. But I decided, you know what? Let me just chill. I'll go home. I'll finish this program first for 6 months and then go home for another 6 months and then only get back into radio after a year. But left work on a Friday, had a big farewell. And there was champagne, by the way, there. Because people were, not aware. Not everyone was aware. That's why it only took a special person to walk up to me and say, listen, I can help you. I can see you struggling, but you need to tell me if you need help. And Friday, and then Monday morning, 9 a.m., I got a call because, people in radio, I don't know what happens these days, but people used to listen to each other. We had the time where we listened to each other, even if you're a broadcaster, but you listen to campus radio, you listen to community radio, you listen to your peers on commercial radio, and trying to understand and see how the new wave of radio is moving, who your competitors are, where you can improve yourself. So I guess these people were listening to me, called me in. I was stand-in for traffic and sports, as well as content production, until it got to a point where I had my own show. and did that for a year and a half and left. But that's a story for another day. I was able to pick myself up and leave the demon of alcohol. My dad was an alcoholic, It never affected me really, not consciously, but subconsciously. And that's why I fell in this trap years later. My dad was very present. He's still alive. Took me to school, my sister and I to school every single day, fetched us, polished our shoes, made sure that we were safe. He was a present dad. He didn't have money, and he was not even a functioning alcoholic, a dysfunctional alcoholic, but he was a functional father, a functional dad, and a friend. And I think that's the person that I looked at, that in the midst of all of this, he was able to function. I didn't even touch alcohol until I was 18. Although, when you're young, you do still, and that's how it sometimes starts. But how do we protect the kids? How do we make sure that they do not fall into this trap? We become honest. We tell them the stories that you are a direct result of your environment. You are a direct influence of where you grew up, whether you like it or not, whether it's negative or it's positive. I mean, the positive part story about where I grew up is it was very unsafe. So kids used to get snatched, and kids used to get kidnapped. Kids used to get hit by cars. Kids were bullied. And I saw this young as I was, when I started grade 1. And then I asked my mom, can I please do karate? And then my mom was like, I don't have money for you to do karate, but I don't have a problem. And then I went to the Sensei Amos Mbele. He's still a father to me till today. And I said to him, I'd like to do karate. I just don't have money. My parents don't have money. And then he's like, no, just call your dad and I'll speak to him. My dad came through and he said, look, I don't have a problem. If he likes it, as long as you're giving me permission to teach him, then that's what I'm going to do. And I did karate, got to green belt. But what it taught me was discipline. And that's why from primary school till high school, tertiary, and even the first few years of working, I didn't struggle with any alcohol-related issue because I had discipline. It's only when the discipline started falling away that I started finding myself in this whirlwind, in this dark pit where I could not pull myself up until I started to relearn discipline. So the beauty about growing up where I grew up, although it was a bad place, is that I was able to protect the kids as well. I used to charge 60 rands per pupil for me to take them to school. So I'm charging the parents. So I'm transporting them from the building where I stay. I got 5 kids that I'm taking to school every single day, crossing the street, make sure that I take them to school and then bring them back after school. That's my job because these parents have got to work some crazy hours. So they can't take these kids to school. So I've basically become a guardian, but I'm a kid. I'm like 10 years old. This is in 1999. I was 10 years old in 1999. And I'm making 300 rands a pop. Now, with that kind of money back in the day, that was 2 full tanks of petrol, at least in a Polo Vivo. These days, that's like 8 liters of petrol. That's it. But I was able to do that discipline, that commitment to these kids. It was not just about transporting them from home to school and back, but it was about also looking after them when I am in school. Those kids were never bullied. Those kids grew up to become some of the strongest, strong-boned kids or backboned kids that I've ever seen because they took after me, they looked up to me, but I was their messiah. I was their protector. So when you've got kids that are just loitering about, there's no one disciplining kids. I mean, where I live, there's 2 primary schools, 2 high schools, and 3 institutions of higher learning. And there's corner shops where they sell anything from cigarettes to bread, from, snacks to cool drink. And sometimes this one time actually, I saw this man who owns a corner shop selling cigarettes to a kid. This kid was in high school, in uniform. And I didn't speak to the kid because, these kids these days, man, I don't want to get smacked, But I went to the guy and I'm like, why are you selling cigarettes to the kid? Because kids don't know any better. In fact, if you try and reprimand them, chances are they might rebel. But if you use love and tact and compassion and understanding, and you listen to these kids, you might be able to help them. Each one, reach one, teach one. Any child you see in the community as an old person, you've got a responsibility to teach them. So I started just hanging around and seeing these kids and just, talking to them. And now they've got a bit of respect. They don't smoke around me, at least. I know they won't stop, but it's like, at least they know there is someone who does not agree with what they do. Rather, just focus their energies somewhere. So we need to look after the kids and hope that we do better as well. We do better as parents, There's an African proverb that says, the ruin of a nation begins in the homes of its people. We need to be a people that learn compassion, people that learn concern, but most importantly, people that learn how to pray, because that is who we are as African people. We understand that for a nation to get ruined, for a nation to die, it means this death and dysfunction started in the household. We need to pray. We need to pray.
You take wine to forget about time. You create a world of your own, where the truth will never be known. Well, brother, don't you know now that you're killing yourself and nobody else? Why don't you quit it now? Yeah, why don't you quit it now? You better quit it now. I said you better quit it now. Responsibility. You're floating in space, feeling good. Running away will never make you a man, 'cause reality is gonna bring you down. Well, brother, don't you know now that you can't and nobody else? You better quit it now. Ooh, why don't you quit it now? Lord have mercy, why don't you quit it now? Yeah, you better quit it now. Doctor can't help. See your brother. Why don't you try talking to your mama sometime? Remember, she brought you into this world.